everyone, welcome to your video on data types in JavaScript. This is going to be a very basic overview. Data types are a super important topic in the computer science field as a whole, but in JavaScript they're not quite as big of a deal, and that's one of the reasons why we like this for introductory programmers. It's less of a barrier to entry, it's one less thing that you have to figure out, because JavaScript is what we call a lightly typed language, meaning that there aren't a lot of data types that it will openly distinguish between, or it will throw errors between when you try and mix them. And we are going to take a look at that today. So just to get us started with what data types are, I'm going to leave some notes in this code, and then we'll do a little testing. My canvas and my initial setup look really boring because we're actually going to be running most of this in the console just to get some ideas of what's popping up. If you're a more familiar JavaScript programmer, this could absolutely be done in a Node JavaScript file and be done much more easily. But since we are coming in at all levels, we're going to stick with the editor we know, and we are going to use that to demonstrate where these values come from. So when we talk about data types in JavaScript or in any programming language, what we're really talking about is how does the computer encode and work with that data. Data types become really important when you're dealing with juggling memory and optimization in code and in programs, and JavaScript as a web development language just doesn't make us worry about that. Some of the main types of data that you guys have seen so far are strings, and strings are anything in quotes just anything in quotes. That's what a string is. They're often words. They can also be numbers, they can be strange characters, and even spaces in between quotes count as a string. Strings can be in double quotation marks, they can also be in single quotation marks. Either way, the computer is going to recognize anything between those two quotes, or the backtick. If you want to find the backtick, it's above your tab key. It will read as a string. Strings it does not see as having the same type of numeric value that the number 5 no quotes would have. They're more something the computer recognizes, something that it can perform actions on, and it can match to other matching strings, but it is not going to do math with them in the same way that it will with other numbers. Now, the next data type that we care about in JavaScript are just numbers, period. So if JavaScript sees something like 400, 200, mouse X, which we know is a variable that holds numbers, all of those are considered a number to JavaScript. In the world of computer science at large, most programs differentiate between integers, like -1, -2, 0, 500, those would all be integer values, and something that we call floats. Float stands for floating point values, and that is anything with a decimal. So 6.75, 5.0, 193.78, all of those would be floats. For JavaScript, it does not care if something is a float and something is an integer. It sees them as being the same enough, or in the back end it is doing some of those conversions for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So it sees numbers. The final data type that's worth us talking about today is something called a Boolean. We have seen Booleans when working with conditionals, and Booleans are statements like 5 greater than 3 that return true or false. Booleans in their core are just something that has 1 or 2 values. So 0 or 1 could be a Boolean. Yes or no, on or off, but in the world of computer science, it is always just true or false. Boolean is such a funny word because it comes from the last name of the guy who thought up this concept, if you were curious. So let's take a look at how the computer reads this. We're going to use our friend the console log, and if we remember, console log doesn't really affect the program running over here. It's just a way for us to get something from our computer to print out in this console, which the programmer is able to see. A good reminder for you and a good reminder to students is that the code that's happening on the left side of the screen here is not normally something that the user can see. They just see what's printing out in the canvas. They rarely ever see the console, and that can be a little conceptually unnerving for them. So we are going to start by finding the type of different data points. So I'm going to find the type of 5. Oops, and I forgot a parenthesis, so it's mad at me. Uh-oh. I forgot what the function is. Give me 1 second, we'll come back and we'll... Alright guys, we are back. I jumped to another tab to figure out how you find data types in JavaScript, which is exactly what I punched into Google, and it turns out this is the one function they decided not to camel case. So if I put in console log, and then inside of my console log, I run the function type of. Inside the parentheses for type of, I'm giving it some type of data. Right now I have 5 in quotes. When I hit play, it's going to tell me that 5 in quotes is a string. If I take 5 out of quotes and I run it, it will tell me that 5 is a number. And I don't think it's going to differentiate if I put 5.0. I don't think it tells me a float. I think it just keeps telling me it's a number. But this is useful because we can see some interesting things happen here. I can also punch in 5 greater than 3, and we should see that it says it's a Boolean because that is something that would return true or false. I could even get fancy and put in like mouse x less than 8, and that would also tell me it's a Boolean. Anything with these comparative operators, that is always going to be something that comes up as a Boolean. I can also test things like not equal to 8, still comes up as a Boolean value. With both strings and numbers, I can use JavaScript in any programming language to do some math. Computers, remember, are just one big calculator. So I can add 60 plus 7, it'll tell me that's still a number. If I turn one of these numbers into a string, however, it is going to tell me that the resulting value is a string. And that is because behind the scenes, JavaScript is realizing I don't actually know how to add 60 the number and 7 the string, which we can think of as opposed to like a value, like the word 7 written out, even though that's not what it is here. It doesn't know how to do that math, so it just converts everything to a string for us. And this gets really interesting where if I just console log that result instead of the type, rather than doing the actual math, this is going to send back to me 607 because it is literally just smushing together the 60 and the 7. When we smush together strings, we are doing this fancy thing called concatenation. Concatenation is just joining together of 2 strings. And we can also see that if we were to add 2 actual strings like hello plus world. And we can go ahead and hit play and we get hello world. If I wanted a space, I would have to add it to one of my strings. If I am just adding numbers, you will see that I get my actual value. And I have never actually tried to add Booleans, so this might throw an error. If I say 5 greater than 3 plus 7 less than 6, I would imagine it's going, oh, it just tells me that that's true. I'm not sure why it tells me that's true, but it tells me that that's true. So all of these are data types that we work with in different ways. The most important thing you need to understand as a beginner is that different functions like background, ellipse, text, they expect to receive certain data types, whether it is you literally typing that data as a string or saving that string or number to a variable and plugging it in. And when they do not receive the correct data type, they get confused and sometimes they break. And that's like a really common error for people to get when they are just starting out. If you are someone who has ambitions to learn other programming languages, you will also find that in those settings, data types become even more important because other programming languages, like even Python, which is a very beginner-friendly and like high-powered language, is going to throw a lot of errors if you do not know how to correctly work with data types. For us at this point in the curriculum, it is not essential that you memorize these things, but it is good vocabulary to start like throwing into your life and throwing out with students. They will formalize these definitions in Unit 5, and for like most of the year or semester, however long you're teaching this course for, they will start having some intuition behind what these things are, so that when it is formally introduced, it's very direct for them. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I am happy to talk more about this and talk about what it looks like in other programming languages. Talk to you later.